The retired man froze when he saw his old German shepherd standing at the edge of the clearing, motionless, trembling, with rough ropes tightly wrapped around his neck. Whoever had done this hadn't meant to scare the dog. They had meant to leave him there. But what the old man did next, with shaking hands, burning eyes, and a heart that refused to give up, would expose a cruelty hidden deep in the countryside and prove that loyalty doesn't fade with age. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. It helps us bring you more powerful stories about old dogs, second chances, and the bonds that never break. The sun had barely risen over the rolling fields of Westfield County when Samuel Turner stepped out of his farmhouse, pulling his jacket tighter against the morning chill. At 68, retirement had slowed his body but sharpened his routines. Every morning began the same way. Coffee, silence, and then the sound of paws. Except today, there were no paws. "Bear!" Samuel called out softly. No answer. Bear, his old German shepherd, never missed mornings. Not even when arthritis stiffened his legs. Not even when age made standing an effort. The dog lived for these quiet moments, following Samuel across the land they had shared for nearly a decade. A tight knot formed in Samuel's chest. He stepped off the porch and scanned the pasture. The fog was still lifting, thin and pale, clinging to the ground like a warning. Then he saw him. Bear stood near the old fence line, completely still. "Bear!" Samuel said again, louder now. The dog didn't turn. Samuel's heart began to race as he walked closer, boots crunching over frost-covered dirt. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Bear's posture wasn't relaxed. His tail hung low, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then Samuel saw it. Ropes. Thick, coarse ropes wrapped tightly around Bear's neck, multiple loops, knotted carelessly, digging into the dog's gray fur. The ends dragged on the ground, heavy with mud. Samuel stopped breathing. "Oh, my God!" he whispered. Bear's ears twitched at the sound of Samuel's voice, but the dog didn't move. His eyes, once proud and alert, were wide, glassy, filled with confusion and quiet fear. He wasn't trying to escape. He had already tried. The raw skin beneath the ropes told that story clearly. Samuel dropped to his knees in the dirt. "Who did this to you?" he said, voice breaking. His hand shook violently as he reached into his pocket, fingers fumbling for the small utility knife he carried every day. He moved slowly, deliberately, afraid even the smallest mistake might hurt Bear more. "It's okay, boy. I've got you. I'm right here." Bear let out a low, broken whine, a sound that cut deeper than any cry. His body trembled, but he trusted Samuel enough not to pull away. Samuel swallowed hard, tears blurring his vision as he slid the blade under the first rope. Someone had tied him here. Not abandoned accidentally. Not caught in fencing. Tied. Samuel's chest burned with a mix of rage and grief. He had lived in this countryside his whole life. He knew every neighbor, every back road, every unspoken rule of respect. And someone had broken them all. The rope snapped under the blade. One loop fell away. Bear sagged slightly, relief flickering across his tired face. "That's it," Samuel whispered. "Just stay still." Another rope came loose. Then another. With each cut, Samuel's hand steadied. Not because the pain lessened, but because something fierce was rising inside him. This wasn't just about saving Bear. This was about protecting what little goodness remained in a world that too easily discarded the old and the loyal. When the final rope fell to ground, Samuel pulled Bear gently into his arms. The old shepherd leaned into him, pressing his weight against Samuel's chest like he always had during storms. Samuel buried his face in the dog's fur and cried, openly, without shame. "I don't know who did this," he whispered, "but I swear to you you're safe now." Bear's tail moved once. Weak, but real, as Samuel held him there in the cold morning light. One truth settled heavy in his heart. This wasn't over, because whoever tied those ropes believed an old dog didn't matter anymore. And Samuel Turner was about to prove them wrong. Samuel Turner didn't sleep that night. Bear lay on a blanket beside the wood stove, his breathing slow but uneven. The old German shepherd's neck was raw and swollen where the ropes had been, fur rubbed thin, skin bruised and angry. Samuel had cleaned the wounds gently, hands trembling as he applied ointment and wrapped a loose bandage to keep the cold air from biting deeper. Every time Bear shifted, Samuel's heart clenched. He sat in the wooden chair across from him, elbows on his knees, staring at the fire as if it might give him answers. The farmhouse creaked softly, the kind of sound you stop noticing after decades, but tonight, every noise felt sharp. Too loud, too close. Someone had walked onto his land. Someone had tied up his dog. That thought kept circling like a blade. Bear lifted his head slightly, ears twitching. "It's all right," Samuel whispered. "I'm here." But Bear didn't relax. His gaze fixed on the back door, body tense beneath the blanket. This wasn't pain or fear anymore. It was vigilance. Samuel followed his stare, a slow chill crawling up his spine. Bear had always been a good judge of danger. Even now, old and stiff, his instincts hadn't dulled. "You hear something, don't you?" Samuel murmured. Bear huffed once, low and quiet. Samuel stood and checked the locks, twice. Then he turned off the lights and sat back down, shotgun resting against the wall within reach. He hated that it had come to this. Hated feeling hunted in his own home. Outside, the countryside lay dark and still. No wind, no owls, just silence. Too much silence. Near dawn, Bear finally slept. Samuel didn't. When morning came, Samuel brewed coffee. He didn't drink and stood at the kitchen window, watching frost retreat from fields. The ropes lay coiled on the table where he dropped them the day before. Thick, rough hemp, stained with mud and something darker. He picked them up, turning them over in his hands. These weren't random scraps. They were tied with purpose. Each knot was deliberate, practical, the kind used by someone who worked with rope often, farming, hauling, trapping. Samuel recognized the pattern immediately. A slip knot, a reinforced loop, quick release disabled. Whoever did this didn't want Bear to escape. Samuel's jaw tightened. Bear stirred as Samuel knelt beside him. "We're going to take a walk," he said softly. "Just a short one." Bear hesitated, then slowly pushed himself up. His legs shook, but he stood. Loyalty outweighed pain. It always had. They stepped outside together, the air cold and sharp. Samuel followed the faint drag marks in the dirt near the fence line. He hadn't noticed them yesterday. Shock had blinded him. Now, with anger sharpening his focus, the signs were obvious. Boot prints, heavy ones, leading away from the fence toward the old service road that hadn't been used in years. Samuel felt something twist in his gut. That road led past 3 properties. One of them belonged to a man Samuel hadn't spoken to in over a decade, Earl Hensley. Bear stopped suddenly, letting out a low growl. Samuel crouched beside him, laying a hand on his back. "You know this scent," Samuel whispered. Bear's ears flattened. That was all the confirmation Samuel needed. He didn't march straight to Earl's place. That would have been foolish. Instead, Samuel called the county sheriff. Not to accuse, but to report. "My dog was tied up on my property," he said calmly. "With rope. Intentionally." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Tied," the deputy repeated. "Yes." Another pause. Then quieter, "We'll send someone out." By midday, Deputy Miller stood in Samuel's yard, examining the ropes and the drag marks. He didn't say much, but his face hardened as he studied the knots. "These weren't done by accident," Miller said finally. Samuel nodded. "I know. You have any idea who might have done it?" Samuel hesitated. "I have a suspicion." Miller glanced at Bear, who lay watching them from the porch. "Anyone who does this to an old dog," he shook his head, "that's not someone who stops at one bad act." That night, Samuel noticed something else. A truck idling briefly on the service road. Headlights cutting through the trees. Then gone. Bear growled until it disappeared. Samuel locked the doors. On the 3rd night, the rope returned. Not on Bear. On the fence. Tied neatly. Mockingly. Like a message. Samuel stared at it, hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just cruelty. This was intimidation. Bear stood beside him, shoulders squared despite his age. Samuel placed a hand on the dog's neck, right over the healing skin. "They think you're weak," he said quietly. "They think I am too." Bear let out a low, steady rumble. Samuel straightened. "They're wrong, because whoever had tied those ropes wasn't finished. And neither was Samuel Turner." Samuel Turner woke before dawn to the sound of Bear growling, not the sharp bark of alarm, not the panicked noise of pain. This was different. Low, steady, deliberate, the kind of growl that came from deep instinct, the kind Bear had only ever used a handful of times in his life. Samuel reached for the flashlight on the nightstand. "Bear," he whispered. The old German shepherd stood near the front door, legs stiff but planted, ears angled forward. His eyes tracked something beyond the walls of the farmhouse. Something moving. Samuel's heart thudded heavily as he slipped on his boots and jacket. He didn't open the door. Not yet. Instead, he clicked off the porch light and peered through the side window. At first, he saw nothing but darkness and the faint outline of the pasture. Then headlights flared briefly on the old service road. A truck. It idled there longer this time. Samuel's jaw tightened. He knew that truck. Rusted red fender. One headlight dimmer than the other. He'd seen it years ago, parked crooked near Earl Hensley's barn. Bear's growl deepened. Samuel laid a calming hand on the dog's back. "I see it too." The truck rolled forward slowly, then stopped again. The engine cut. Silence returned, heavy and deliberate. Whoever was out there wanted to be noticed. Samuel backed away from the window and locked the deadbolt again, though it was already secured. He wasn't afraid in the way he'd been the first morning. Fear had hardened into something colder now. Resolve. The truck eventually drove off, leaving tire marks pressed into the soft dirt near the fence. Samuel waited another hour before the growl finally faded from Bear's chest. When morning came, Samuel made a decision he'd been avoiding. He took the ropes from the table and loaded them into the truck. Bear watched from the porch, tail still, eyes alert. "You're coming with me," Samuel said gently, "but you stay in the truck." Bear huffed softly, not happy but compliant. They drove the service road slowly, dust rising behind them. Samuel hadn't been to Earl Hensley's property in over 10 years, not since a bitter argument over a boundary fence and accusations Earl had made about livestock losses. Samuel pulled up near the old barn. Earl stood outside, leaning against a post, cigarette dangling from his mouth. He didn't look surprised. "You lost," Earl drawled. Samuel stepped out of the truck, holding the coiled ropes in his hands. "You recognize these?" Earl's eyes flicked down for half a second. That was enough. "Someone tied my dog with them," Samuel said evenly. Earl smirked. "Old dogs wander. Get tangled." "These were tied," Samuel replied. Nodded. "Reinforced." Earl shrugged. "You accusing me?" Samuel took a step closer. "I'm asking." For a moment, something dark flashed across Earl's face. Irritation, maybe guilt. Then it vanished. "That must have been sniffing around my traps," Earl said. "Scaring game. Costing me money." "He's 12, Samuel said quietly. "He barely makes it across my yard." Earl scoffed. "Animals get old." "Happens." Samuel's hands tightened around the rope. "You left him there to choke." Earl leaned forward slightly. "Maybe next time he won't come back." The words landed like a punch. Samuel didn't respond. He didn't need to. Earl had said enough. He turned back toward the truck. Behind him, Earl called out, voice sharp, "You run to the law. You'll regret it." Samuel stopped and looked back, calm as stone. "You already crossed a line." He drove away without another word. That afternoon, Deputy Miller returned. Samuel told him everything. The truck, the threat, the conversation. Miller listened closely, jaw set. "We don't have enough yet," the deputy admitted. "But we're watching him." Samuel nodded. "So am I." That night, Bear paced more than usual. He stopped at the back door several times, sniffing, whining softly. Samuel sat with him on the floor, stroking the graying fur along his spine. "You remember him, don't you?" Samuel murmured. Bear's ears flattened. The old dog remembered more than Samuel realized. Years ago, when Bear was still strong, still fast, Earl had thrown rocks at him near the fence, had cursed, had threatened. Dogs don't forget cruelty. Late that night, Bear suddenly stood and limped toward the yard-facing window. Samuel followed. There, near the fence, something moved. A shadow. Samuel's breath caught. He grabbed the flashlight and stepped onto the porch. "Who's there?" he shouted. The shadow bolted. Fast, clumsy. A man running. Samuel didn't chase him. Instead, he turned the light downward. Fresh footprints. And beside them, a length of rope. New. Samuel picked it up, hands shaking. Not with fear, but anger. Bear stood beside him, growling low, protective. Samuel looked down at his old companion, eyes burning. "They think you're just an old dog," he said. "They think I'm just an old man." Bear's tail lifted slightly. Samuel straightened his shoulders. They're about to learn how wrong they are. The rope lay on the kitchen table, like a coiled thread. Samuel Turner stared at it long after midnight. The farmhouse wrapped in uneasy silence. The length of hemp was new. Clean fibers, sharp smell, untouched by weather. Whoever dropped it by the fence hadn't come to scare Bear. They had come to send a message. Bear lay near the back door, head lifted, eyes alert. Every few minutes his ears twitched, responding to sounds Samuel couldn't hear. A distant engine, a footstep too soft, the whisper of movement carried by the wind. Samuel hadn't felt this kind of tension since his working years. The nights when trouble felt close enough to touch. He stood, locked the doors again, and checked the windows. The shotgun rested near the wall, but Samuel didn't pick it up. Not yet. This wasn't a moment for panic. It was a moment for clarity. He knelt beside Bear and gently touched the dog's neck, right where the rope burns were healing. Bear leaned into the touch instinctively. "They're trying to break us," Samuel said quietly. "But they don't know what you've already survived." Bear's tail moved once. Near dawn, the sound came again. A truck. This time, it didn't stop on the service road. It pulled into Samuel's field. Samuel's chest tightened. He clicked off the lamp and moved to the window, heart pounding. Headlights cut across the pasture, illuminating the fence line, the exact spot where Bear had been tied days earlier. The engine idled. Then a door opened. Bear rose instantly, growl vibrating through his chest. Samuel placed a hand on the dog's shoulder, steadying him. "I've got you," he whispered. A figure stepped into the light. Earl Hensley. Samuel felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. Earl walked slowly toward the fence, rope slung over his shoulder like a tool. Not hiding, not rushing. He wanted to be seen. Samuel opened the door and stepped onto the porch. "That's far enough," Samuel called out. Earl stopped, smirking. "Couldn't sleep? Get off my land." Earl laughed quietly. "You don't own fear, Sam. Just space." Samuel's voice was calm, steady. "You tied my dog. You come back here again. It won't end the way you think." Earl took another step. Bear barked, sharp, commanding. Earl flinched, eyes flicking toward the sound. That dog should have been put down years ago. Samuel felt something snap. "You leave. Now!" Earl's expression hardened. "You think calling the sheriff scared me? You got no proof." He lifted the rope slightly. Bear lunged forward instinctively, only to stop short, legs stiff with pain. Samuel felt his heart lurch, the memory of Bear bound and helpless flashing violently through his mind. "Don't," Samuel warned. Earl smiled thinly. He remembers, don't he? Animals always do. That was the moment Samuel understood. This wasn't about property. This wasn't about traps. This was about control. Samuel stepped down from the porch slowly, positioning himself fully in front of Bear. "You touch him again," Samuel said, voice low and deadly, "and I will make sure the whole county knows what kind of man you are." Earl sneered. "You don't have it in you." Samuel met his eyes. "You don't know me anymore." For a long second, the night held its breath. Then headlights appeared at the edge of the field. A second vehicle. Blue lights flashed on. Earl cursed under his breath. Deputy Miller's cruiser rolled into view, tires crunching on dirt. The deputy stepped out, hand resting casually near his belt. "Evening, Earl," Miller said. "Funny place for a visit. Earl dropped the rope. Samuel exhaled slowly. Miller looked down, nudging the rope with his boot. Mind explaining this? Earl said nothing. Miller turned to Samuel. You okay? Samuel nodded. My dog's been threatened. Bear stood tall beside him, eyes locked on Earl. Miller sighed. Earl, we've had complaints. You've been warned. Tonight you're trespassing. Earl glared at Samuel. This ain't over. Miller's voice sharpened. Yes, it is. You leave now. Earl spat into the dirt, climbed back into his truck, and drove off, slower than necessary. The lights faded. Silence returned. Samuel's legs suddenly felt weak. He knelt beside Bear, pulling the old dog into a careful embrace. It's all right, he whispered. You're safe. Bear pressed his head against Samuel's chest, breathing deep and steady. Deputy Miller approached quietly. We'll file a report. This time it sticks. Samuel nodded. Thank you. Miller hesitated. You did the right thing. Standing your ground. Samuel looked down at Bear. He taught me how. That night, the farmhouse felt different, not peaceful, but defended. Bear slept deeply for the first time in days. Samuel sat nearby, watching the fire burn low. The threat had been confronted. But Samuel knew one truth remained. Some wounds don't heal with arrests or warnings. They heal when loyalty proves stronger than cruelty. And Bear, old, scarred, unbroken, already won that battle. Winter arrived early that year. The first snow fell quietly over Westfield County, covering fences, fields, and old scars alike. Samuel Turner stood at the kitchen window, watching white flakes drift down like ash from a gentler fire. The land looked peaceful again, innocent, almost, as if it had forgotten what had happened beneath its surface just weeks before. Bear lay near the stove, curled tightly, his breathing slow and steady. The ropes had long been gone, but the memory of them still lived in Samuel's hands. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, he could still feel the weight of them, rough, cruel, unnecessary. But Bear was healing. The fur around his neck had begun to grow back, silver and soft. The raw skin had faded into faint pink scars. He walked slower now, favoring one leg more than before, but his eyes had changed. Where fear once lingered, there was calm. Samuel moved carefully across the room and knelt beside him. Cold bothering you today, old man? Bear opened one eye, then thumped his tail once against the floor. Samuel smiled. Life didn't snap back to normal. It settled, slowly, carefully. Earl Hensley never returned. The sheriff followed through, a formal warning, a restraining order, quiet but firm consequences. Earl's traps were confiscated. Complaints from other neighbors surfaced once people felt brave enough to speak. Cruelty rarely lives alone, Samuel learned. It hides behind silence until someone finally stands up, and Samuel had. One evening, as dusk bled into night, Bear struggled to rise. Samuel was at his side instantly. Easy, he whispered, supporting the dog's weight. Bear stood for a moment, then sank back down with a quiet huff. Samuel's heart tightened. The vet confirmed what Samuel already suspected. He's old, she said gently. His body's tired. He's not in pain yet, but he will be someday. Samuel nodded slowly. I know. He brought Bear home wrapped in blankets, the countryside rolling by the truck window in shades of gray and gold. That night, Samuel slept on the floor beside him, hand resting lightly on Bear's chest, counting breaths like prayers. Days passed. Then one morning, Bear didn't rise at all. He watched Samuel move around the kitchen, tail wagging faintly, eyes warm and present. There was no fear in them, no confusion, just trust. Samuel sat beside him, hands shaking. You stayed, he whispered. When they tried to take you, you stayed. Bear licked his hand once. That afternoon, Samuel carried Bear outside, carefully, reverently, to the old oak at the edge of the pasture, the same place Bear used to sit and watch the sunset, ears twitching at distant sounds only he could hear. Snow dusted the ground lightly. Samuel sat with Bear in his lap, coat wrapped around them both, breath visible in the cold air. I won't leave you, Samuel said quietly. Not now. Not ever. Bear's breathing slowed. Samuel felt it, the moment when the world holds still. He pressed his forehead against Bear's. Tears came freely, unrestrained. Not sharp this time. Not angry. Grateful. "Thank you," he whispered, "for protecting me when I didn't know I needed it. For trusting me when others didn't." Bear exhaled once more. Then he was gone. The countryside remained silent, respectful, heavy, still. Samuel buried Bear beneath the oak, placing the rope, cut cleanly, harmless now, beside him, not as a reminder of cruelty, but as proof of survival. That night, Samuel returned to the farmhouse alone. The silence felt different, not empty, honest. Weeks later, Samuel placed a small sign near the fence line. Simple, clear, no trespassing. Kindness lives here. Neighbors noticed. Some stopped by. Some brought food. Others brought their own stories. Dogs lost. Animals harmed. Things they wished they'd spoken up about sooner. Samuel listened, because that's what Bear had taught him. To stand. To protect. To stay. On quiet evenings, Samuel still walked the land. Sometimes he swore he felt Bear beside him. A familiar weight. A steady presence. And maybe that was true, because loyalty doesn't disappear when a body fails. It stays in the ground, in the air, in the choices we make afterward. Samuel Turner lived the rest of his days knowing one thing for certain. An old dog had saved him, not with teeth or strength, but with unwavering trust. And Samuel had honored that trust.